My name is Steve McMahon. I'm Chairman of the Irish Patients Association. And for the next 10 minutes or so, I'm just going to give you a little outline of our organisation and what we're trying to do, and then to try and bring in some agenda, which is not prescriptive. It's open to people to raise any questions that surface in their minds. Can I just have the? Can I see this? I'm actually having to work this remotely with my colleague up here behind me. If I can just see what's on the screen here. No. I have to turn around. Sorry. We'll get there yet. Mind yourself running around there. Jeez, the last thing you just have to call an ambulance for you.
You should then you. If you just go to yours, you should come up.
Which screen?
Okay. See what I can do. I can see what can I send yours now.
Okay. Well, sure. I'd also like to welcome Brock Reeves, who's from the Harvard Stem Cell Institute, to be here with us this evening and share his experiences from the States, and many other people who are here also with various skills. I believe there's a lady up there who's travelled from France to be with us this evening, sitting up at the back, and welcome, and I hope that you'll have a fruitful evening. I'm assuming that we can get moving. Yeah? I have nothing on the screen here, but sure. I think that I'm also a member of the board of the International Alliance of Patients Organisations. And really I just want to make the point that around the world, in many ways, patients have similar needs and so on. The only thing is that in various parts of the world, people cannot get the access to healthcare that perhaps we in the developed areas can get such access to. It's also a reminder too that we're a fragile species, and you know, in a way you will hear some people say that we're consuming a fragile planet, and it's just to have that awareness with that. On the next chart, if we can just flick forward quickly, it's just to remind us too that in Africa today that there's probably been a mother walking for many days for her child to be seen by a doctor or a health professional. And when she finally gets that treatment, that it's quite possible that even the medicines that she receives could be counterfeit or whatever else, and may not even receive that treatment. And again, I just use that to remind ourselves that we're very fortunate to have both the intellectual and the financial resources to be able to discuss in a mature way the kind of developments and needs and the future of our healthcare system. The last chart there on the, if you just click in there, please, thank you. Again, just to make a point about Hurricane Katrina, and I've used it in many places around the world, and it's really to just emphasise the fact that when we think we have all our sophisticated systems in place and all of the controls in place, that there can still be catastrophic systems failures, which is really what that chart is really reminding us of, that we need to be very careful in being proactive in the way that we develop our systems and services and so on. So if we may have the next chart, please. Thank you. So basically, the Irish Patients Association is an advocacy body. We're not a lobby group. We listen and learn from patients directly. We deal with about anything from 3,000 to 4,000 contacts a year, and it's in that contact directly with patients that gives us some understanding of their needs. And certainly, regrettably, the contacts that we have are often when things have gone wrong. It's very seldom actually that people ring up to say, actually, I've had a wonderful experience. But in that, then we also work in partnership within the system in the areas of education and research and inputting, like many other organisations now in the areas of policy and so on. And then we work with many healthcare organisations and education and regulatory bodies in Ireland. And we're also members, as I said earlier on, of the International Alliance of Patients Organisations. I'm a member of its board, and it is a truly global patients organisation with, I think, something like over 200 member groups with 360 million patients in their area of responsibility. So our funding comes mainly through it has been from various sources, but primarily we get funding from the Health Service Executive, and we get some small funding then from some one or two pharmaceutical companies and health insurance companies. Thank you. So what are our aims? Are basically to have a world-class patient-centred healthcare system that's built on patients' rights, responsibilities and trust. And our aim is to ensure that the patient remains at the very centre of our healthcare system. And I'll touch on that briefly later. And the key to that goal is patient safety. If you can click on there, I'm mindful of time here. Thank you. So based on our context with patients, what are their needs? What are the common themes that arise when we deal with them and when things have gone wrong? First of all, the need is that the patient is the key person in our healthcare system. It's not, while the providers are important in actually delivering quality care, the real person that's important in our healthcare system is the patient. That's what all of the development and all of the energies are directed towards. They also have a need, if we just click on there, thank you, to be treated with dignity, to have equitable access to services and medications and innovation, to have quality and safety proactive management programs, have access to meaningful information, to be able to give informed consent, and that's informed consent, not just being given a form to sign off on. And then when things go wrong, to have robust grievance procedures. Like, we've been travelling with this message for nearly 10 years, and it's really only in recent times that we begin to say that I think that there is some progress being made in delivering those, and particularly in the area of the system beginning to listen and recognise that things do go wrong. And finally then, if we just look at the next chart, I think the most fundamental need of patients is to trust the system. And that trust it's doctor-patient trust, it's nurse-patient trust, it's pharmaceutical company patient trust, it's policymaker patient trust, and so on. And that, certainly when trust breaks down, it's an extremely hard value to re-establish. We often hear where, in our personal lives that if something breaks down in a relationship or whatever else, because it's family, somebody might make the extra step to get things mended. But when you're dealing with impersonal institutions and organisations and individuals, it may not be that way. So if we just move on there quickly. Again, I mentioned there about research we've done through Dublin City University on healthcare rights and responsibilities, and if we crank it forward again, please. You can see there that I'm just putting in the context of this evening that, it touches on the areas of the right to innovation, to be informed, to give consent, for respect of the patient's time. Often, you would hear that a particular right may be violated. The one important area that we see is the right of equity of access. And, we would obviously like to see that as a constitutional element, but that's a discussion for another day. So we're saying and promoting, we distributed 150,000 cards to the pharmaceutical, or to the pharmacists, community pharmacists last year, to try and empower people to say if something goes wrong, have any of these rights been violated. May I have the next chart, please? Thank you. Now, I just call this the lucky four-leaf clover, and it's really, I suppose, for the fact that when people enter the system, sometimes you do need a little bit of luck. Errors and accidents and so on do actually happen. So we click on there just fairly quickly. The domains of risk then are the areas of clinical risk. Are doctors making the right decisions, timely decisions, appropriate treatments, and so on and so forth. And these are the areas where things can go wrong. I'm feeling a little bit proud this evening because I see myself referring to myself, and it's the first time I've ever actually had something published, and that's the Medical Legal Journal of Ireland last Christmas that took this chart without the animations. The other area then is obviously in the domain of risk and management, how the whole system is managed, how decisions are made, how resources are spread and spent, and so on. And that needs clarity and transportation, or clarity. The next area then is in the area of medication, and this is an area perhaps where it comes into play, the subject in a way. That our medicines are safe, that they're tested, they're approved, they're reviewed. The patients obviously have a responsibility in adhering to medication regimes. It's easy to forget, but that the medicines are safe, and there's transparency in how the trials and the clinical processes are conducted. And finally, the area then is inequality of access. In Ireland, for the benefit of our foreign guests here this evening, you're 5 or 6 or 7 times more likely to die of a respiratory illness if you come from a low-income family versus the more affluent in our society, and that's an area that needs to be addressed. And then finally, for everybody in our healthcare system, in the stem there is your part. We all have to take ownership of this problem, to be proactive in exploring when things are happening and changing, and where there are risks, to actually have a part in actually ensuring that we do have a safe and quality assured system. So if you just whiz through here, I'll just go through the next chart. Again, I just want to make the point about patient-centred care. It's an interwoven relationship, and there are power and supports and so on that all have to work together with the patient at the centre as the key person, and that we're not all actually in silos. And then we have that wider society involvement who actually approves the funding and the money really to be spent in our healthcare system. Thanks. And again, I'm not going to overburden this, but I do want to make the point that people talk about patient-centred care. Patient-centred care is not a buzzword. Patient-centred care is actually respecting and support for the individual wants, preferences, values, needs and rights. It's also about access to healthcare services warranted by their condition, and also about empowering the patient to take responsibility, obviously, for their healthcare where they can, and be independent as possible, and for patients' organisations to be recognised, involved and encouraged to take a leadership role, and involvement of patients and patient representatives in all decision-making processes, which will ultimately have an impact on patients' lives. Thank you. So I just want to look at some of the things I've been looking at over the last week, and I am very much a layman in this entire debate. But what I did do the other night was I went on the internet, and I'm putting them up here as amazing but true claims, and I'm hoping our experts will be able to tell us later on. They're saying there, in the italics on my piece here, that for over 30 years stem cells have been used for treat patients with conditions such as leukemia and lymphoma. Stem cells are used in the treatment of a wide range of conditions. Sorry, my apologies. I was trying to get my head around the small print here. Can you hear me now? Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, and thank you for saying that you couldn't hear me. So really what they're saying here is that it can be treated for a wide range of conditions today with positive and encouraging results, right? And the following diseases have been treated by various stem cell practitioners with generally positive results. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as a layperson looking at, and as somebody who had any of those problems, ALS, Alzheimer's, anti-aging, autism, right down to spinal cord injuries, that claim looks a very enticing claim. And really it's part of what I want to hear this evening is as to the limits of where these treatments can be. May I have the next chart, please? Also then another one, amazing but true claims here that says that the hospital uses the newest neurological approaches to provide effective and safe stem cell treatments to a wide range of neurological disorders. Treatment centres are chosen that reflect the uncompromising quality of care that we adhere to. India has been a leading venue for regenerative medicine and is ideal for patients from Europe and Asia. Our latest a dedicated patient counsellor to assist with your schedule and any additional healthcare needs you may have. Treatment by a physician with premier academic credentials and in good standing with their local medical association. I know that I can see a few people from the medical regulatory area this evening, and I'd just be interested to see how that can actually be proved. May I have the next chart, please? Thank you. Okay, again, this is another stem cell centre that's offering treating patients actively with these degenerative orders, from Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, cerebral palsy, which is close to my own family, degeneration, multiple sclerosis, and so on, spinal cord injuries and stroke. Okay. Next one. This is only 2 nights ago. So really what we need to do as scientists and researchers, just in a general sense, now that we have some scientists here, is to sort of remind them that is the patient at the centre of all their decision making, and does he or she come first. That it's not a question of competition amongst the people that are out there on the frontier of new discoveries, but that the patient is at the centre of this is the purpose for it. Do they create opportunities to listen to their patients, and their extended team have formal opportunities to meet and to listen to patients? I believe it's probably very difficult if your eye is down at a microscope every day of the week. It might be difficult to actually understand what's actually happening at the end result of their work. And are they just happy to meet regulatory requirements or consistently exceed them? And are they happy to provide, in the wider sense, data or information to inform a patient and empower them to make informed decisions and give consent? And is the research really balanced versus the return on the investment? That is equally another area that we cannot lose sight of. Okay, and then just to make a point in the area of trust that I made earlier on, that your CEO is very likely more concerned about the fragile domain of trust, which are customers, in this case patients and the public, rather than the bottom line of turnover, size of organisation, etc. So we just say to that, protect it. And finally then, just some questions then for the team, and as I say, these are my questions and some of my colleagues, and I'm sure you can add to this. Firstly, what are stem cells? Can all types of stem cells do the same thing? Because that's confusing. How can patients establish fact from fiction about the claims made? How can patients measure, as I said earlier on, premier academic excellence in the field? How much do we know about how stem cells work with the human body? There were claims in one of the earlier charts there, I didn't reference it, where they were saying that it all knits in very handy with the human body. Are there 70 stem cell treatments? How many are there? What's on the horizon on this technologies? How can we work together to establish codes of practice? And what do the regulators and the policymakers need to do to protect the public? And I'm using the word protect as not just to protect the public from quackery, but also the level of confidence and also timely access to those innovation outputs. So in other words, that the delay is that there aren't any sort of delays that are unnecessary that would actually delay the treatment to patients. And then my last chart there then I think is just, I want to say to you all, to do good and do well. To do good in the sense that we all depend on each other, and to do well, as we've seen in recent times in our own economy, if we don't have the success in our economy, we won't have the resources to invest in our healthcare. I hope I've just given you a feel for sort of the broad brush areas. Feel free to add your own questions in due course. And again, just to to welcome you here and to thank you very much. I'm going to hand over now to Stephen Sullivan. Thank you.
Okay. Hello? Hear me when I come down. So I think the first thing we can do is just introduce the people we have in front of you so that you know who everybody is. And actually anybody who's a speaker might come down the front now as well and grab a seat because we'll introduce everybody all together. So Patrick Costello might come down as well. Okay, so the central idea behind this meeting was we were having Ireland's first International Stem Cells Conference, a research conference, like boring scientists talking with long words. And I kept on getting people inquiring whether they could attend in a patient capacity. And I've been working in Harvard for several years. And one thing Harvard is extremely, extremely good at is communicating what it's doing to the outside audience. And they have extensive outreach programs, especially when it comes to stem cell research, because stem cell research is very, very, very misunderstood a lot of the time. It's very easy to misunderstand why things are being done, and there's various religio-political aspects to it that kind of make it very, very complex. And the medicine and the science behind such research is, generally speaking, left to the sidelines. So Brock Reeves here is the executive director of the Harvard Stem Cell Institute, and he's a very kind of unique kind of individual in that he comes from he's not tainted by being a scientist. He's a person who can speak normal language, but he's very much involved in seeing what's going on in stem cells because he's the director of Harvard Stem Cell Institute. And he's very, his daily job is about communicating stem cell research to the public, to the media, etc., etc. So and also he's Christopher Reeves' half-brother, which is very, very fortunate from the point of view of maybe attracting some of the media members here, and so that we can expand the message a little bit further than the people directly in this room. So then we have Hiram Chipperfield here, and Hiram is a stem cell scientist who has left research and is now working in a consultancy firm. So his job is about basically validating treatments. So before you can market something as a medically substantiated treatment, it's Hiram's job to basically go through the data and, basically say objectively, this is good or this is not up to par. And you've already heard from Stephen, who's our Irish Patients Association, and who really kind of pushed all of us to getting this to happening for the patients today. And then Dr. Orla Hardiman, who is a consultant neurologist in Beaumont Hospital and has spoken out several times in Ireland about specifically unsubstantiated stem cell treatments being talked about in the media and being passed off to the public. And then also we have Patrick Costello from the Irish Medicines Board. And the Irish Medicines Board really is the patient's first line of defence. Their specific remit is to ensure that all materials used in medical procedures are up to the correct standards, so that they're effective and not risky. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a very informal kind of structure, whereby we've got slides up on the overhead here. Brock, you're going to maybe start off, but we'll interject. If you want to grab that there, we'll interject. So we're going to basically go through the basics of stem cells. What is a stem cell? Are all stem cells the same? And then we'll move more into the therapeutic field and how do you realize if a treatment is real or if treatment is somebody's way of trying to get your money while putting you at risk and not giving you a realistic chance of being treated effectively. So, I'll let you.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Stephen and Stephen, for inviting me here to join you this evening. Before hearing about the Irish Patients Association, I associated IPA with something quite different, although I hope that an IPA, both can have an equal or different amount of influence. Steve McMahon was saying earlier that one of the challenges and issues here was trying to put the patient at the center of the conversation here. And one of the things I would like to emphasize is the role and the importance of the patients for a couple of reasons. One is not only are stem cells, whether embryonic or adult, relevant to many diseases and conditions, but it's also relevant to all of us in terms of how we grow and age. And stem cells are a key part of the maintenance and repair process in daily life. They're not just an issue of a catastrophic injury or a life-threatening disease. And I think we'll see more and more of that as a deeper understanding of that as we go along. One of the interesting things that was done in the U.S. a couple of years ago was a major market research study by one of the leading marketing and PR firms that showed that people became supportive of stem cell research when they knew people that were affected by diseases or conditions that could be treated by stem cells. And so the direct connection to the utility and the value of stem cells is important for all of us, and it's also important for the regulators and the politicians as they hear about what is affecting their constituency. One of the other dynamics that has occurred in the U.S. is over the last several years, obviously partly correlated with the Bush administration restrictions on federal funding of embryonic stem cell research, was the rise and the impact of the disease foundations, such as the JDRF, the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, the Michael J. Fox Foundation in Parkinson's, the Myelin Repair Foundation, the SMA, the Spinal Muscular Atrophy Foundation. In other words, diseases that were looking out for the welfare of patients with certain conditions. And what's interesting is they're not only throwing money at early stage scientific research, but we're actively looking at how do they form a different business model. How do they look out for the welfare of patients? How do they invest in quality of life programs at the same time as invest in early stage research, at the same time as help form startup companies, at the same time as help connect academic research to commercial entities, because their goal is to bring research into early stage scientific research into the marketplace so it can directly benefit people. And you've seen different foundations taking very different approaches and actually some very interesting business models coming out of that. And I think that's helped create a certain dynamism in the market there. So we'll talk about a few of those things, but I just want to highlight several topics that we'll touch on as one of the Stevens was just alluding. First of all, I would like to start off with the notion of what is a stem cell, issues about embryonic stem cells versus adult stem cells, what's right, what's useful for what sort of situation. Then we'll move on to the notion of policy, because one of the things that all countries, the U.S. Very visibly wrestling with recently, is what should be the role of national policy? How do you separate politics from science? And to what extent does one separate politics from science? As Obama overturned Bush's executive order recently, he also sent a bunch of questions, saying, look, this isn't the role for the White House. These questions are to be thought about and decided by the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. What is the impact of national policy or state policy on national competitiveness? What does it say for science, the amount of research that's development that's going on in a country? How does Ireland think about that? How does the U.S. think about that? And one of the issues in the U.S. is also that came up as a result of the Bush era federal funding restrictions, sort of what is the role of the states versus the federal government? Clearly, you don't have that here, but you do see sort of differences appearing both between states within the U.S. and between countries elsewhere that will get in the way of scientific collaboration that ultimately could benefit patients. So it can end up with a patchwork of both funding and policy that actually slows down research. That'll lead us into the regulatory questions. Then we have a couple of experts with us here. And one of the key issues to think about is what are the key regulatory issues that cell therapies will face that drugs haven't faced? Because when you put cells in the body, you have to worry about what type of cells you're putting in, where they're going, what they're doing, what are they turning into, are they staying where they are, et cetera. So many issues that regulatory bodies have to concern themselves with. And that will in turn lead us to, speaking of therapies, the notion not only of stem cells as therapies, but stem cells as tools to help find therapies. And one of the things I think that's often overlooked in public discussion and is potentially underappreciated, but it now is being looked at by the commercial sector quite actively, is how do stem cells help us understand diseases in a better and more thorough way so that we can find better drugs. So stem cells may not be the therapies, but they may help us find better therapies that are either because they help us understand disease mechanism, because we can test for safety and toxicity without testing in people, or can help us find therapeutics in and of themselves. So a lot to talk about, and one of the other points is not to be lectured at, but to have a discussion. And so what I encourage the audience to do is interrupt at any point. Not you.
I want to introduce one last person here, Finola. So basically, she's a trained clinician who's gone off into law, basically. So you've done philosophy, bioethics as well. So she's really coming at it from like several different aspects together. So, all in one, you've got a clinician, bioethicist, and a legal mind as well. And she'll be kind of telling us kind of what are the consequences of the current situation and the persistence of the current situation and why we should think about things and develop things further. Back to you.
Thank you. As you can see from this slide, there's a lot of information out in the public and in the scientific community that can be very confusing and lead people to make certain decisions that may or may not be good ones. For example, the recent news about the couple planning to receive stem cell treatment in China for their child, a potential clinical trial for macular degeneration, and an article in the New England Journal of Medicine that specifically took head-on the issue of that there were existing 73 treatments from adult stem cells and 0 for embryonic stem cells that had been advocated by the Family Research Council in the United States. And so with all that information, what is one to do? So in the course of this meeting, we want to talk about that, raise some of those questions, and if we can't answer the questions, punt gracefully. That was a joke. But one of the important issues in this discussion is that we do have these multiple perspectives because, as you can see, stem cells are such a complicated area that raise issues about ethics, about law, policy, money, who should make money, who shouldn't, what is the role of government, industry, political bodies, the patient in the process. So just to remind us, if it ends up being complicated, it's because it is. So first of all, a quick start of what are stem cells and why should we care? One of the issues that some of you may not need to be reminded about is the fact that chronic disease costs a lot of money to healthcare systems. And patients care about that because they have to take care of those. Governments care about that because they have to pay for those. The United States is paying about 17% of GDP for that. More other countries are much more sensible about that than we are. Another factor is aging populations. This is U.S. data in front of you. This is true literally around the world, except for certain countries. And as we age, not only do we become more active consumers of healthcare services, but we drive up the cost. And as we talked about before, how do we think about sort of addressing some of these chronic and degenerative diseases, but also how do we maintain healthy aging is something that society should think about as a whole. And so why are stem cells relevant? I just put up a cartoon of a body here with a list of a few disease categories, such as nervous system, cardiovascular, diabetes, cancer, etc. And one of the reasons that stem cells are talked about in these disease categories is because they have a few common features, as you see on the right. Oftentimes, there'll be multiple genetic factors, and so all the genetic analysis we do hasn't helped us solve the disease because there's also not only complex genetic interaction, but also complex interaction with the environment. Yet they often come crashing down around a particular cell type. So if you can figure out what's going on with that cell type, can you help solve that disease? And importantly, there's often a long time between cause and effect. Whether, for example, by the time diabetes is often diagnosed, you've lost half your beta cells. By the time ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease is diagnosed, oftentimes it takes a year and you have only 3 or 4 years left in average lifespan. So by the time you know that someone has a disease, the disease has already had its impact. So the question is, how do you find out earlier so that how can you prevent that? How can you intercede earlier in the disease process and avoid some of those costs that I was showing you before? So stem cells, by definition, and Stephen or anyone can jump in on this, have two attendant characteristics. One are that they self-renew, and the other is that they differentiate. And so by definition, any tissue-specific, any adult stem cell, any embryonic stem cell can do that. Those are the two characteristics of what it means to be a stem cell.
So by differentiating what that means, is that not only can a stem cell produce more stem cells, but it can produce other cells that become specialized to different functions. So, for example, a stem cell, in some instances, an embryonic stem cell can become any cell type in the human body. Adult stem cells can become usually cell types representative of the tissue from which you initially isolated the adult stem cell. So
I'll skip this picture. So when people talk about embryonic stem cells, the excitement is that they can form, as Stephen was saying, all cell types. And here you see a picture of how these first go down 3 major lineages and then differentiate into certain tissue types, and which then are associated in turn with certain diseases in this picture. One of the things that and here, by the way, is just a picture of those lineage trees with pictures of cells, for those of you who wanted to see actual cells instead of pictures of organs. Now, one of the issues we should talk about here is the role of adult stem cells, because one of the things that has become, at least in the U.S., tell me the conversation here, And actually, one of the has been a lot of people saying, well, now that you can reprogram cells, you can take an adult cell like a skin cell or a hair follicle, et cetera, and reprogram it to an embryonic-like state. Do you need embryonic stem cells anymore? So that's one issue that's come up. And huge progress has been made just in the last couple of years. One of the irritating things that happened back in the U.S. is when basically Bush said, see, I told you I was right. But anyway, that's a that's a side point.
Just to state the case, like sometimes scientists will find a new area of research and become very, very excited about it. And then, they're talking to a reporter, and the reporter takes their excitement and puts that in the media. So it's very important to realize that, new types of stem cells that come along and that have interesting properties are very, very exciting to scientists. But ultimately, the truth about such new stem cells is painstakingly extrapolated or taken out from years of research. So, like for example, in the case of these reprogrammed skin cells, we can make the cells forget what they are, but there are substantial questions, especially when it comes to therapy, about if you can make cells forget what they are, how long do they stay? How long do those memories stay forgotten? Because obviously you don't want a cell that you've made into something for a patient, kind of having past memories reemerge after they've been put into the cell. So it's important to realize that new stem cells that you see in the media have to be put through a lot of research before we really know 100% what they are. And that's just one point that kind of totally gets missed in some of the media in Ireland, I think. So we just come from a scientific meeting where there's a lot of debate about these new reprogrammed stem cells, and there's still a lot of questions we're trying to address. And before the basic scientists are kind of happy they know what's going on, nothing's going to proceed to a clinical stage, I think.
And I just put up a picture of the blood system on the left to show how all the cells in blood come from a hematopoietic, in other words, a blood-forming stem cell on the left, and how that happens in different stages. And the blood system is one of the most well-known and well-understood because people have been working with that for years. And now peripheral blood stem cells are those that help reconstitute your immune system, for example, after chemotherapy. So one of the questions is, as we find tissue-specific stem cells, for example, let me back up a sec. That hematopoietic stem cell can only make blood. That's all it does. That's its job. And it's great that it does it. But, what happens, for example, when you see muscle on the right? How do you make more muscle? How does a muscle repair itself? Or you may want to comment from the nervous system perspective, from the tissue-specific stem cells.
I think it's actually even more complicated than that because, in a way, we know less than we did 10 years ago, than we thought we did 10 years ago. In the brain, for example, my main research interest is motor neuron disease, Lou Gehrig disease, or ALS in the States, motor neuron disease on this side of the Atlantic. And one of the things that we've begun to understand in motor neuron disease is that it's not really just a disease of motor neurons. So it's not just a question of getting the stem cell to becoming a motor neuron. It's a question of what exactly is happening in motor neuron disease, and what would we like to replace? Is it the motor neurons, or is it other cells, or is it a combination of motor neurons and other cells, or is it we would put in cells that will help the motor neuron disease and the other cells talk to each other? So a motor neuron disease is supposed to be a system degeneration where only motor neurons are involved. Parkinson's disease is a disease where we used to think we knew about what it was. We used to think it was degeneration of one small part of the brain, but we know now that about 30 or 40% of people with Parkinson's disease develop a dementia. Alzheimer's disease, we thought we knew what it was as well. We thought we had that really well sorted in terms of which cells are affected. But again, more recent understanding of what systems are involved turn out that that's much more complicated. So it's not just a question of getting a stem cell to turn into a magic cell that will replace the cell that's dying. We know far less about how the nervous system works than we thought we did. And the nerves in the nervous system we know are only part of the story. There are other cells within the nervous system that we used to think were just sort of the glue cells. They're called glia, means glue. That we know that they play a much more important role than we ever thought possible maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And incidentally, Einstein's brain doesn't have more neurons than anybody else. He just has more glia, which is actually quite important.
Forget those neurons, you don't need them. Yeah, and there's not only the different, like the glia and neuron cell interaction, but then there's, for example, the interaction with muscle and with bone, and what happens, for example, the neuromuscular junction. What cell is sending a signal to what as they die off? So it even gets more complicated than that.
Again, there aren't many new things under the sun, and I worked in Boston many, many years ago, and my research project was to try and to grow muscle cells in a test tube that we could inject back into boys with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and it didn't work then either, for many reasons that are good for the same reasons why it's going to take a bit longer to be able to use stem cells to replace. It's much more complicated than we thought. As you say, getting the nerves, getting the muscles, getting the muscle cell to know what it should be doing, getting the muscle cell to talk to the nerve cell, finding out where the problem really is, it is in the nerve or is it in the muscle, making the nerve then talk to the muscle in the way that the brain wants the nerve to talk to the muscle. So it's very complicated.
And speaking, for example, of muscular dystrophy, there have been recent experiments that have shown that they can basically sort of cure a mouse from muscular dystrophy. However, making the jump from mouse to human is yet another category of complexity. And I was talking with a patient or someone with diabetes the other day and said, if I hear another story of curing diabetes in a mouse, I'm sick of that. Tell me when you can do it in a human. But the issues, for example, when going from mouse to human are not only going species, but you have scale and complexity issues. So, for example, how do you keep adult cells alive? How do you have enough of them? How do you deliver them systemically so you don't have to inject them just in a single muscle cell? So, for example, when you read stories about solving muscular dystrophy in a mouse or similar sort of stories, and then people, oftentimes the press will jump on it and say, see, this is exciting. And it is exciting, and it is a key breakthrough, but there's still many more things that have to happen for it to actually get to the point where it's valid in the clinic.
I think the point to get across with regards mouse and humans, doing experiments in lab rats versus humans. Sometimes in research, mice can really be good approximations for what will happen in human people. Human people.
What about the non-human people?
As opposed to the Americans. No, but essentially there are many aspects that are common between mouse and human. So doing experiments in mouse helps us learn more about human sometimes. But ultimately, you need to, go into, bigger vertebrates like pigs. The way transplantation developed, they moved to animals bigger animals that are more similar to humans in terms of size and in terms of basic processes. So that's what I'm trying to say is just because it works in mouse or just because it works in pig doesn't necessarily mean it will work in human in the same way. And there's no real clear distinction between, if it works in mouse today, it'll work in pig in a year and it'll work in humans in a year. There's no kind of correlation. It fluctuates a lot between species.
There's two other points as well that we need to be clear of. That the mouse model is the key term. We have one of the things that's happened in the last 10 or 15 years is the explosion in genetics, which has actually enabled all the stem cell work to happen, and that has allowed us to make a model of a particular disease where we know the gene that's involved, so we can make the gene defect, and now we can make mice. At least I can't, but people can make mice that have this mutation or this abnormality in their gene, and then the mouse will get the disease that looks like the human. But the way the mouse gets the disease that looks like the human is because often we put in many copies of the abnormal gene. And then the sort of readout that we have is a readout that's based on that. And trying to translate that back into humans that maybe have the mutation or maybe don't, but maybe have only one bad gene, is much different. And that's actually a major stumbling block. If it works in the mouse, it might work in the mouse for reasons that are a function of the mouse, or a function of the way the mouse is made, rather than a function of the actual disease process. And that's a big problem in translating work from laboratory animals to humans. And then the second problem, which we are guilty of as medics, is that if we're doing a human study, the readout that we take from the humans, from our clinical trials, may be very relevant to understanding the disease process and the causes, but it might be completely irrelevant to the person who has the disease. And that's really important, actually. We need to take into account what the first Stephen was talking about. The patient is a person, actually. It's not we're all patients. We're all going to be patients at some point in our lives, and we're all patients as citizens as well. And when we're in clinical trials, if there's a so-called breakthrough in a clinical trial, it may be a very important scientific point, but the actual implications for the person who has the condition may be quite minimal, and some may actually be somewhat negative. So we need to be aware of that as well. It's not a simple thing of the treatment works and the patient got better. Often the treatment works, but the patient died anyway, or the treatment worked in the mouse, but actually it worked in the mouse because the mouse is different to humans. And we need to, when we're thinking about this whole sort of landscape of what we would call translational science, there are many pitfalls that are very difficult to explain in a short bullet point or a short soundbite or a short synopsis that gets into the newspapers, that makes the 10 o'clock news, that people get very excited about. And we need to be very conscious that we probably sound like we're certainly I get accused of being excessively negative in the clinic for this reason. But I think we do have to be conscious that there are many steps between where we are now and where we are scientifically and where we would like to be clinically.
Yeah, and I think that clinical point actually probably means we should switch gears to talk about what does it mean to be sort of a cell. What does it mean to be a therapy? How do we regulate that, and how do we look out for patients' safety in that process? And I know both Hiram and Patrick will speak to that.
Sure. Give my presentation. Sure.
So let me just switch gears.
So the word treatment is an interesting word in that if I say treatment to you, you'll make unless you're in medical and scientific research, it'll mean one thing to you, which will mean like something that makes things better, basically. And that's not true. It's kind of a more neutral word. It's like a neutral word, like protocol almost. So this is part of what we're trying to get across here is that the word treatment, you can have a treatment that is dangerous and ineffective. Now that's not the type of treatment we would like for patients. But if I say treatment, the word should be neutral in your mind rather than indicating that there is automatically a positive benefit from it. And this is a key word that people use in fudging, I think, the reality of the research and the science.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So I'd thank the organisers as well for giving, I suppose, me and the Irish Medicine Board the opportunity to discuss I guess tissues and cells legislation that's in place in Ireland at the moment, and also a little bit about the limitations of that tissues and cells legislation. Presentation summary will be, I guess, who is the Irish Medicines Board? I know some of you will be aware of what that agency does, why we regulate tissues and cells in Ireland, the legislation that covers tissues and cells in Ireland, and for those of you, I'm going to go through that quite quickly because it's guaranteed to cure insomnia for the vast majority of you. It's really only of interest to regulators and the people that are being regulated. Sure. What is regulated in terms of how the regulations are, what parts of tissues and cells is regulated at the moment, who is regulated. There is some new legislation coming into force across the EU, because the EU is recognising that there are a lot of what they term advanced therapy medicinal products being discussed in the literature. So the European agencies are well aware that they need to stay abreast of these new treatments and trying to put in regulatory mechanisms that encourage ATMP or advanced therapies to be produced, but also trying to ensure the quality, safety, and in that case the efficacy of these advanced therapy medicinal products. We'll talk a little bit about a stem cell treatment incident in Ireland, and certainly we'll take any questions as and when they come through, so feel free to stop me. So the mission of the Irish Medicines Board is to protect and enhance public and animal health, so we look after all the animals in Ireland as well, through the regulation of medicines, medical devices and healthcare products. So we are kind of quite a broad spectrum regulator. Many of our colleagues in Europe have a number of different regulators to regulate each one of these different points, but we brought them all into one house, which is good because we can share our expertise. We're regulated for medicinal products, both human and veterinary. So we go out to where they're being manufactured to see that the standards for manufacture are adequate. And then there's also a system for a second check on all the data that supports that clinical indication or what that treatment should be used for. And that's in medicinal products. That kind of second check isn't there for tissues and cells as yet across Europe. We're regulated for medical devices. And then back in 2004 we became the regulator for blood. And 2005-2006 we became the regulator for tissues and cells. So this legislation is quite new across all of Europe, and certainly new for an agency like the Irish Medicines Board. And we're also going to become, in the near future, regulator for cosmetics. So why regulate? So I was interested in listening to Stephen's presentation. We are, I suppose, a first world country, but I mean, in terms of stem cell treatments, the biggest issues in relation to tissues and cells have happened in those first world countries. If you look at, if you ever go to Google and put in New York body snatchers, there's a recent case where biomedical tissue services were being pursued by the FDA because they were essentially stealing bones from mortuary and selling them into the supply. So very recent, in a well-developed country, people do break the legislation that is in place. And then also the well-documented stem cell treatments that Newsnight investigated that affected quite a number of UK patients attending a clinic in Holland and also in Ireland as well, and we'll come to that near the end. So this is the boring bit. I won't spend much time on this. There's 3 European directives, and they came into force at different times. So essentially, the first one came into force in April 2006. They've been transposed into national legislation, so when a directive is issued by the EU, we've got to bring it into our Irish law. We can tweak it slightly, but we have to keep the minimum requirements. We can put more stringent requirements in. But Ireland tends to just go with what the EU have given us in relation to how we legislate and how we regulate. So I suppose in any legislation, it's important for you as a patient and also for regulators and for those being regulated of what's within the scope and what's outside the scope. So this directive applies to the donation, procurement, the testing of the donor, the processing, preservation, storage, distribution, and has certain requirements for vigilance. By vigilance we mean how people monitor adverse events when they give you a cell. And if you have a reaction to that cell, they should be reporting that to the regulator. Of human tissues and cells intended for human application. So this only covers tissues and cells that are going back into people. It doesn't cover tissues and cells that are being used for research purposes only, that never go into an individual. It's also important to remember that this tissues and cells legislation applies to a wide range of tissues and cells, from bone to skin to ligaments to tendons, up to the more newer, novel type treatments such as stem cells. So it is quite broad. It also covers assisted reproduction technologies for IVF as well. So it's a very kind of broad catch-all type of regulation. So what's out of tissues and cells legislation? I suppose if somebody harvests skin during a particular surgical procedure from your leg to move to your back, that's outside the scope. It happens within one procedure. Blood components are regulated by a totally different regulation. And organs or parts of organs, if their function is to be used for the same purpose as the entire organ. So heart transplants, kidney transplants, they're outside the scope of tissues and cells legislation. There's actually a new organ directive coming from the EU in relation to this. And I suppose this is the next point is an important differentiation: clinical use. So provided the tissues themselves, the safety and quality of them, meet the requirements of this legislation, a clinician can use them as he or she sees fit. And that is always kind of protecting the autonomy of a treating physician to determine what's appropriate for their patients. So what is regulated? So the specific requirements for how the tissues and cells should be donated and how the procurement occurs, how you get consent, how you document that you've got that consent, how you assess the donor of those tissues and cells. You don't want to be passing a malignancy or an infectious disease onto the recipient of any tissues and cells. So the very specific selection criteria and the laboratory tests for donors are defined in this legislation. You have to be authorised to provide these tissues and cells in Ireland and across Europe under the same piece of legislation. There are inspection and control measures. This is just a technical bit which kind of gives the Irish Medicines Board its power to implement this legislation. Then, of course, traceability and coding systems. If you have one donor and they can donate many, many tissues, then how do you trace them to all the recipients if subsequently you find out about a disease in that donor? And the coding systems are just the kind of IT systems that will allow you to track those very, very quickly, because this is a global type of market. The Irish Medicines Board has to have a register of tissue establishments in this country, and those tissue establishments have reporting obligations for adverse events and adverse reactions associated with tissues themselves. So who is regulated? I suppose in Ireland we're quite small, so I've taken this picture from the web, and it's a typical stem cell allogenic transplant process for, say, a typical hospital in this country where we're using maybe stem cells to treat a leukemic patient, be they peripheral blood or bone marrow derived stem cells.
So maybe just to clarify that, for the last 50 years or so, when someone is being treated for cancer, they get radiation, so you want to kill the cancer cells. And what they do is they take some of your bone marrow before they give you the radiation, and then they put it back after you've had it, and then that bone marrow contains stem cells, and then it replenishes the blood, and the patient lives. So, I mean, this is one of the misconceptions that, all stem cells are new, whereas some stem cells therapies have been around for like 50 years, and we've got very good legislation for those kind of things.
And as Brock said, these are the hemopoietic stem cell treatments. These are the ones that treat kind of blood-derived disorders. And in Ireland, we have a number of these type of kind of like tertiary hospitals or specialist hospitals who provide this kind of service. And it's quite easy to regulate when it all occurs in one establishment, and it's very easy for the Irish Medicines Board to regulate. But that's complicated by the fact that, there can be different entities in each different part of the process. So if somebody needs a stem cell transplant for leukemia, those stem cells may come from France, they may come from Germany. So you're relying on the regulators there to ensure that the procurement or how they're harvested is done appropriately. Then they may come to an establishment in this country for processing to provide to the patient. And then you have that hospital may supply them to another hospital where the actual patient gets treated. So trying to regulate the whole join-up of that can be quite difficult. So we have what's called a procurement organisation who procure the tissue establishment, can do all the activities, or it can just process, so it can just kind of bring the tissue to a stage where it's good to use in the patient. And then the organisation responsible for human application is that kind of doctor-patient interaction where he or she is physically giving it to the patient. And then also we have a donor testing, so how the donor is tested for a range of infectious diseases such as HIV and a range of the hepatitis. Now, as Stephen was saying, the tissues and cells legislation is kind of covering that kind of older treatment. So the treatments that are the processes that fall within tissues and cells legislation are quite basic. So you can cut and grind, you can shape, you can isolate the stem cells, but you can't do anything else. If you do anything else, there's another piece of legislation, that the advanced therapy medicinal product legislation, that is going to come into force, which essentially treats them as medicinal products, and it's a higher stage again of regulation. So a lot of these processes are very, very basic processes that you do with the stem cells. You don't change them in any fashion. You don't differentiate them or make them grow into a different type of cell. You don't expand them. You don't culture them. If you do that, then you're into a totally different piece of legislation. So, I don't want to spend too much time, as I already said. Well, I just showed 4 entities in the first slide. We could have, tens of procurement organisations feeding one central tissue establishment, and that's supplying hundreds of hospitals. And then we could have harvesting of tissues and cells in this country that are going for processing to a different country. So it can be quite complicated. Of course, there's always overlapping legislation. At the moment, multi-organ donors donate all their organs, but sometimes those organs aren't good enough to be used in their entirety. So, if a heart isn't used for a heart transplant, then the heart valves can be harvested and they can be used for a heart valve replacement. But the donor selection criteria need to be harmonised, and that's what the Commission is looking at the moment, in terms of a donor can be a tissue donor and can be an organ donor. As I said, I'm not going to spend much time on the advanced therapy medicinal products, but if you want to provide tissues and cells to somebody who's going to do this extended manufacturing, then tissues and cells legislation only applies to start, donation, procurement and testing, and then the full medicinal product legislation applies. The Commission has also, I suppose, realised that, in order to get the expertise across Europe together, they've set up a centralised kind of body at Europe, at an agency called the European Medicines Evaluating Agency, where they're going to look at these ATMPs to see if they should be marketed and go for formal marketing authorisation across Europe. So, I suppose just before the legislation came into force, we had a well-documented stem cell treatment in Ireland. Or in 2006, I suppose just before the implementation, the media reported quite heavily of a GP providing stem cell treatments to multiple sclerosis sufferers. Essentially what was happening was a company in the US which essentially supplied umbilical cord cells for research. It was always supplying to research facilities throughout the world. A South African company contacted them and asked them to ship kind of quite a large stock of umbilical cords to a storage site in the UK. The storage site in the UK didn't know it was storing cells for human application, so their regulator weren't aware that they were actually doing it either. And then the storage site was shipping those on request to an Irish-based GP and also to a Dutch-based GP who were treating patients referred by this South African company. And this South African company had a web base which was essentially making the same claims that Stephen McMahon showed you, the 70-plus cures. And it was quite a substantial upfront payment. So it was before the legislation came into force, but we had the draft legislation, so we just went down to the GP's office, and we actually said you need to be able to demonstrate the quality and safety of these tissues and cells. And it was quite obvious that he had no information in relation to any of these cells. He had no idea where the quality and safety, essentially didn't know where they were coming from. So all treatments were ceased. But that was before we had any empowering legislation, and he had stopped. So I guess in summary, our role is to monitor the quality and safety of tissues and cells, but the clinical practice, so what a doctor decides to do with those stem cells, is outside the remit of the Irish Medicines Board at the moment, and really is up to the professional bodies to set standards for their professions. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. So like basically, there is legislation that towards the therapies that have been around for a long period of time. Anything new takes a while to legislate properly and to basically understand fully that you can legislate and come up with risk assessment for those new treatments. So HIRM is basically on the front line of that kind of evaluation. And basically you can think of medical and scientific translational research like validation. You know, if you go and if you're going into a second-hand car lot and you want to buy a battery, it's getting your guarantee that this will be a functional battery you're buying and that, it won't ruin your car. So HIRM is basically there to help us understand the difference between a battery that doesn't have a guarantee and a battery that does.
All right, thank you, Stephen. I'm kind of fortunate to go after the speaker from the Irish Medicines Board because he basically covered the first half of my talk. And I should just clarify. So my background is a research scientist. I then worked for a stem cell company in Singapore. And now my job involves helping companies try and get their products approved by the regulatory agencies. Okay, so in the eyes of the regulators, there's a difference between a cell therapy and a medicinal product. As the previous speaker mentioned, any therapy, anytime cells go into a person, it can be called a cell therapy. And as he said, the Irish Medicine Board is responsible for ensuring the safety and the quality of those cells. But what happens for a more complex product, a more complex stem cell product, for when there is a substantial manipulation and for when there is a manufacturing process? An example of this could be cell therapy, a mass-produced cell therapy for type 1 diabetes, which is designed to replace the insulin-producing islets that are lost in that disease. So in the eyes of the regulators, that would be a medicinal product, and it would have to go through what's called a marketing authorization. And I hope today I'll be able to show you why this is an extremely long process, but also to give you some sense of why it should be such a long process. Then I will just point out at the moment, in the European legislation that covers these medicinal products, there's no distinction between stem cell products and cell therapies of any other kind. So the same standards apply to any cell therapy, whether they're stem cell therapy or any other kind of cell therapy. Okay, so here we go through the... So if you have a cell therapy medicinal product, it has to be authorised by the European Medicines Agency before it can be marketed to the public, before it can be sold. And I will be first to admit, despite the best efforts of myself and my colleagues, as yet no cell therapy has been approved through this procedure. So there are no cell therapy medicinal products that have been approved in Europe. Of course, there are cell therapies such as bone marrow transplantation that have been around for 50 years, but they're not, in the eyes of the regulators, they're not classified as cell therapy medicinal products. Okay, so if you have a medicinal product, what do you have to do to get it approved in Europe? What do you have to do to market it to patients? So the requirements for a cell therapy are broadly similar to that of any other medicinal product. They're in the eyes of the regulators, they're split into three main groups. There's the quality of the product. So there's the non-clinical studies that support the product, and then ultimately the clinical studies. So we'll start off with the quality. So as a research scientist working in a university, I would work with stem cells, and I would try and differentiate them and make them into my insulin-producing beta cells so I could cure a mouse. And while I was doing this with all due care, I wasn't too concerned about the grade of my reagents. If a growth factor to expand the stem cells could have had transmissional...
What's CGM?
Oh, CGMP, okay, is current good manufacturing practice. Okay, and this is a set of regulations designed to ensure the quality of medicinal products. So if you have get a packet of Lipitor, for example, these regulations are designed to ensure that in every tablet you take is the right amount of medicine at the right concentration, at the right purity, with no contaminations. And so for chemical pharmaceuticals, it's complicated, but it's doable. But when you get to cell therapies, you have to ensure that there's no contamination of the cell therapies, that the cells themselves don't have any viruses. So it goes back to me when I was in the lab. I wasn't concerned about if possible a growth reagent, a growth factor that I was using could contain viruses. I was protected. I had gloves. I made sure that I didn't get the viruses myself. The mouse, I was trying to cure them, but the risk was low, but I wasn't too concerned about it. But then that's obviously not acceptable to go into humans. And also, if working in the lab, I might go out and go and have lunch and not wash my hands before coming back into the hood. It happens. I have to...
He's Australian.
Yeah. And so that obviously introduces a possibility of contaminating your product, and that is not acceptable for for the manufacturers of medicinal cell therapy products. And so one of the huge hurdles that companies and other people face is manufacturing their cells consistently and reproducibly and in a safe manner to satisfy the requirements of the CGMP requirements, to satisfy the safety of the patients that we would like to be treating. And that is not a trivial undertaking to comply with those requirements. Okay, but say you manage to spend a few $1 million on getting a GMP manufacturing facility with all the required clean rooms and things like that. So you have a product that you can manufacture reproducibly. So then it's starting to go into some animal studies as the next step. And so animal studies, you need to show that you're in an animal model, be it mouse or pig or monkey, that your product works, that it has there's some evidence that the product will work as you hope it will be, as you hope it will. And then there's also a set of safety and toxicity studies that you have to do in animals. So you have to, as best as the animal models can show us, you have to show that the product is safe and is not toxic. And this is, in the case of cell therapies, this is quite complicated because for a tablet of Lipitor, you can give it to an animal, you can observe it within no longer than a week, or the compound is metabolized or excreted by the animal, and it's unlikely that anything else is going to, any adverse effect is going to happen after a week. But the problem with cell therapies is that they can persist and are maintained in the body. And so these animal studies have to be a lot longer. So the idea is to replace the islets in type 1 diabetes, you have to study those cells for months and months and even years to ensure that those cells remain safe, they don't become tumorigenic, and they don't migrate somewhere that you don't want them. Okay, and so the role of these animal studies is to provide some idea of efficacy and some idea of safety before the product is used in humans. And after you have that information, and only then can you then request and then apply for a clinical trial. And then you go to friends at the Irish Medicine Board, and they will suggest you start off with a phase 1 clinical trial. So the idea of this stage of trial, is that it's a very small trial, and you're just assessing the safety of the product. And again, because these products can persist and are maintained in the body, these initial trials in just a handful of patients, can last months and years. So you're already 3 years into your product development, at least. And then you'll go on to another slightly larger phase 2 study, and you start to look at the efficacy of the product. And again, these can take a long time. And finally, the final stage is large phase 3 trials. And these can take, depending on the disease that you're treating, they can range from 100 to 1,000 patients. Often 2 independent phase 3 trials are required. And these large studies are designed to confirm the safety and the efficacy of the medicinal product. And again, these take a long time. And so once you've completed this long process, it goes off to the EMEA, and it's evaluated by experts throughout from throughout Europe. And this evaluation procedure, to give you an indication of how thorough it is, it usually takes over a year, involves the submission of many, many thousands of pages of documentation. And this group of experts, the regulators, will then decide whether the body of evidence indicates that the product is safe and effective. And it's only after this process will the treatment become available for all patients throughout Europe. So I hope you can appreciate that. Is there a question up there?
Well, I'm just curious, when you say that the EU has yet to approve
No, so there are quite a few in the pipeline. One could be approved, or there is one therapy that's awaiting a decision that should come out in the next month or two. Whether that's positive or negative, we don't know. And then there's a decent number that have applied and have not been, for safety or efficacy, not been found to have a positive risk benefit-risk balance. So a number of therapies have undergone this application process but have been rejected for one reason or another. And it's a difficult process. The regulators, quite rightly in my view, are quite conservative about this. And maybe once we do have a couple of products approved, they'll gain more experience and they'll maybe be able to come up with better guidelines of what required. But at the moment, there's no precedent. So in the face of this unknown, they're moving quite slowly.
May I just ask?
Yeah, there was a question.
Are these stem cell products you're talking about, or other products?
So there are stem cell products, and so I'm talking more broadly about cell therapy products. And within that larger group of therapies, there are some stem cell therapies that have gone to the EMEA and have not been approved.
It circles back to what I was saying earlier on. I think patients from different disease groups do have a need to know what's actually in the pipeline. Some pharmaceutical companies will say, well, we have something we're dealing with for Alzheimer's, some other diseases, and we might have 5 years, 2 years, whatever else it is. And the other side too is that I think why it's important to know, particularly when you get up to stage 3 or phase 3, that that you could find patients that might want to go onto that sample, the larger sample of 1,000 patients, simply because it does give them that opportunity or whatever. And there needs to be a structure in there that is actually.
Can I come to that, Richard? Because we actually do clinical trials, and I think there's a lot of misconception around the purpose of a clinical trial. It's more of this problem with the mismatch. I mean, the purpose of a clinical trial is to test a drug for which that we don't know if it works or not, and so we have to test the drug or the product using some people who are getting it and some people who aren't. And so the idea and the whole purpose of the trial is to determine whether the treatment works or not. So there's no huge great advantage for a person being on a trial. There's no a priori knowledge of any advantage of the person going on the trial. I know that it conveys hope, and there is evidence, obviously, if you're on a trial, you might do better just by virtue of being on a trial. I have to say that in motor neuron disease, all the trials that have been done, now this is not stem cells, obviously, because there are no trials in stem cells, but for drugs, the people who were in clinical trials did worse, actually, because none of the drugs worked. So there is this misconception that because a drug is in the pipeline, it's going to work. A lot of the time they don't. In fact, I don't know what percentage, 1% from molecules, from molecules to therapy.
Well, even 50% going into phase 3
fail. So, but from molecules to therapy, it's 1%. 1%, yeah. And so I presume the same thing will apply in these sorts of medicinal therapeutics.
I mean, I think it is kind of important that we highlight that if someone's considering going for an experimental treatment, they do so as part of a clinical trial. Is that fair enough? Because I mean, if otherwise, the scientists don't learn anything, the doctors don't learn anything, and
I think this is you may want to contribute to this debate. This is a very big debate in where I work anyway in neurology, because there's this balance that has to be, because the conditions that we do in neurology, they're neurodegenerative conditions, and there is no treatment. There's no disease-modifying treatment for them, and so you can understand how people would go on the internet and would desire to participate in anything that looks like it might be vaguely possibly beneficial. And so the debate is, the person's right to self-determination versus our job as in a way gatekeepers of therapies in one way, versus the scientist's job to produce something that's beneficial. You might want to contribute to that because that's kind of what you're area.
Just the idea of paternalism in medicine, that people now are pushing for autonomy in decision making and treatments and in therapies, and that doctors are being derided a lot for suggesting that no, it wouldn't be in your benefit to do this, and it's a very difficult balance to achieve all the time.
I mean, what you can do is offer information about the relative risk of what you intend to do, and I think that is something that has to be made clearer to a patient.
Yeah.
So there's a very big organization called the International Society of Stem Cell Research, and they their website is www.isscr.org, and they're kind of an independent group of a lot of scientists and clinicians that are involved in stem cell research. And they've got a good site where they kind of highlight, what treatments are known to be validated and backed up by data, by scientific information, but also they have a set of guidelines for the kind of rules that should be implemented when doing clinical trials.
Can you make just one comment that I think if that needs to be really strongly highlighted, that clinical trials, which is where stem cells are at the moment, should not cost you money. You should not have to pay for a stem cell therapy because it's at the very best it's an experimental protocol. So nobody should have to pay to get stem cells. And if anybody is paying to get stem cells, it's immediately a suspect enterprise.
Yeah, the scientist or the clinician is looking at you. You're helping them to do their job. You shouldn't expect to have to pay people to help them, even if that inverted coming back to help you. But yeah, that is one of the 5 ways to really spot a scam. If people are asking you for large amounts of money up front to partake in an experimental therapy. Yep.
There are stem cells. There are stem cell trials ongoing in the pipeline.
Geron, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. No, they just got approval for their phase 1 trial. So with that, they spent, I think it was at least 5 years gathering the animal experiments and doing the animal experiments to support that phase 1 clinical trial, and they had to submit at least 20,000 pages of documentation to the FDA to get that phase 1 trial. That's just to give you some idea of how much information and how much work is required to get some of these clinical trials.
Orla, do you want to comment on that?
I suppose that one of the things that's important from the point of view of neurological disease, that I don't know what that trial is, but from
the Degenerative trial is basically they're taking embryonic stem cells, differentiating them, or taking products from them and using them to try and treat spinal injury.
Spinal injury. You see that? Yeah, because
remyelination.
Yeah. So that's in a way, it's quite a simple task compared to the complexity of other neurological or neurodegenerative diseases, which is what I think a lot of people, MS, motor neuron disease, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, they're conditions where there's quite a long ways away from where we're at now in terms of what we might be trying to do with stem cell therapy. I don't know, do you want to talk about what the options might be from that point of view?
But just a quick comment on the Geron trial that came out of work that started in large part in Hans Kierstedt's lab, and where he got a lot of publicity about being able to help rats walk again, which was very convincing scientific data. This trial is, not about regrowing a spinal cord, because all of a sudden people said, "Oh, look, this is really exciting. We can, solve spinal cord injury." What it is proving safety in about 8 to 10 patients of recent injury, so within 14 days of injury, and about remyelinating, which gets back to Euler's point, sort of that sheath around the spinal cord. So you're not regrowing the neurons themselves, you're helping sort of the conductivity, if you will, the support system for those neurons. And, it would not be relevant for someone who had an injury that had scar, that had serious spinal cord compression, a whole bunch of other issues. So it's a first and important and critical step. But to Hiram's point, it took a lot of data, a lot of time just to get there. And there's still, a lot of issues. And again, not to be negative or positive, what we have to just do is understand sort of where the science is and what can actually be done in that process. Although the exciting part is it is the first, at least in the U.S., the first therapy in a phase 1 trial from human ES cells. So that is an exciting first step for the field and for science, and ultimately for patients, we hope.
So, Geron had been announcing for several years that they were just about to start trials. And why did they take so long to start trials? Was it Obama? Was it, just they were need more data, or?
Well, Hiram probably knows better than I do, and I'll let him comment. They're asked for more data and safety. So I think safety was a big issue.
Yeah, and I'll just comment on companies. Often they will announce that they're just about to commence clinical trials. Exactly. That can often be to please the investors rather than anybody else.
This is one of the things as well about where the money comes from to try and develop the treatment. People like Orla and myself will always be screaming for the government to be funding this kind of stuff, because if the government are funding it, then you're left alone, and you can come to either a good or a bad decision. If there's a company involved, then there's always, we really want this to work. And sometimes, even if you're trying to be unbiased, you can, believe things that you want to believe. And this is the hallmark of medical and scientific validation, is it makes it impossible for that kind of mindset to slip into interpreting your results.
There's a question there.
You talked there about them cells in Europe.
Yes.
Their stem cells. And if that is to go ahead, what would the next step of them stem cells would be? Did you say there was work being done in Europe? Is that right?
Okay, so for the Geron, with the Geron, for the Geron example, what will happen is that they will do their phase 1 study in no more than 10 patients, and that will probably take at least a year. I'm guessing. I'm not aware. I don't know the details of their trial protocol. And then they will move into phase 2, which may or may not come to Europe. But it wouldn't be a large number of patients. It would be 50 patients or so, 50 to 100, depending on the trial design that they want to use. And then the stage after that would be the phase 3, which probably would include a couple of European hospitals in that study. And so to get marketing authorization in Europe for their medicinal product for their therapy, it is usually expected that you conduct at least some of the clinical trials or have some European hospitals involved if you want to market that product in Europe. Does that answer your question?
I'd just like to go back to the point you were making there, and maybe our colleague from the IMB might have a comment on it. 20,000 pages of documentation for medicine. I mean, who's competent to keep tabs on all of the strands that are probably being reported in this? And in a serious way too, again going back to, I think, from a patient's perspective, that it's important, I think, certainly for a reasonable layperson to understand in language that can be understood as to what's actually going on. Because it seems that it's all happening behind a lace curtain, and we come out and tell you a little bit, and we let you know what's going on. I think there needs to be more openness in that. What do you think?
They make it completely open, then people are going to start lobbying them for one result or another. So I think, in fairness to the companies, I suppose there's a lack of transparency because they're trying to keep people who really want one result or another kind of a little bit at arm's length, so that they can really come to an objective decision as to whether this treatment is real or not.
Can I put that in? And I'll stop after this. That may be so, but I mean the whole question comes back to, I think, a theme that seems to be emerging over this, which is appropriate regulation. That no company should feel obliged, because of whatever pressures are, to rush a result that people in charge say this is not what we should do. And maybe that's part of the solution to this problem, to enable that more transparency in there, to have a tighter regulatory process that ensures that there can't be these conflicts of interest. But I understand what you're saying, Stephen.
There's two sides to that point. One is, in an ideal world, that's absolutely right. But if we don't regulate, I mean, probably about half people here remember thalidomide. That's what happens when you have failure regulation. It's thalidomide, and that we don't want. Do people know the story of thalidomide? Yeah, everybody knows the story of thalidomide. Yeah. So I mean that's. But there's also a commercial aspect to new drug development. 1% of products that are in pipeline in drug companies. Drug companies are part of our community as well. And so there has to be an element of commercialism as well. You can't. They're not philanthropic organisations. They have to get a return on what they do. So there's a balance to be had between rushing the legislation, rushing the product, and so making sure it's adequately regulated, but also ensuring that it is a commercial enterprise, and we need to be aware of that. And it's not a them and us, but a lot of the medical profession see it as a them and us. Those nasty, horrible drug companies there to work against us. But it's a much more complicated relationship. And there has to be checks and balances all along, and the idea is just to maintain checks and balances just right, and that's probably a counsel of perfection, but that's what needs to happen.
And can I just make a point on the transparency of the assessment process? So whenever a new medicine is approved or rejected by the EMEA, they publish on their website what's called an assessment report. And so that basically summarises what the regulators have thought of the product and outlines the reasons why a particular product may have been rejected. And in some cases it can be a little bit complex with getting into the statistics of clinical trials, but it does a reasonable job of explaining why a particular medicine was not deemed to have a positive risk-benefit analysis. So there is a degree of transparency in that process.
Okay. Will we move on to another?
One of the things I would like to move to is speaking of drug companies. Is this full? Is it? Okay. Is to talk about the use of stem cells as vehicles to help find better drugs. Orla was just talking about pharmaceutical companies, and they're interested in stem cells to not only understand how a certain disease works, its mechanism of action, but to assess whether drugs are safe or not, and also help find new drugs in and of themselves. And so here, for example, you see a picture of the eponymous Lou Gehrig at the top. And the notion in particular that many companies are interested in is how do we use some of the new technologies that we talked about in nuclear reprogramming to create cells of a particular disease type that then we can study them in vitro in the dish to help find better drugs. And on that point, I'll actually turn it over to Stephen to talk about some of the work that he's doing with his partner in crime here on this topic.
Okay, so we're moving on to the phase now where we've discussed cells as therapies that you can put into a patient, and the risk assessment of such processes. But really, and that's the simplest way to think about stem cell therapy. So usually, media normally cover that aspect of it directly because the public understand it. It's simple, and I've only got 2 sentences to get in a lot of information. So they generally talk about stem cells in the context of a stem cell replacement therapy. So like a replacement therapy where we put tissue into a patient. But really, especially recently, a lot of the interest in stem cells displayed by researchers and clinicians is about using these stem cells as a research tool. And this is just an example of a research program here in Trinity with Gavin Davey over there. So it's an indirect approach which hopes to help patients, but indirectly, right? So the idea is, if you just see in this mark out here, there's a patient, and the patient has there's an arrow going to fibroblasts, and that they're skin cells. So we take skin cells from a patient with a disease, in this case Parkinson's, and then we make that skin cell forget what it is with some fancy science using viruses and genes that can cause cancer, but for this particular application we can just make the cell forget what it is as a research tool. Sometimes some of these cells become cancerous, but most of the time they're okay. So from the point of view of doing research, it's okay because if they get a bit wonky, it doesn't matter because you can just throw those particular cells away and then just focus on the cells that are still behaving correctly. So taking skin cells, reprogramming them back so that they forget that they are skin cells and become like ES cells, like embryonic stem cells. And when I say like embryonic stem cells, I mean testing is ongoing, and certainly at the beginning, a lot of the tests that patients or that researchers were throwing at these cells, they could see no difference. But again, just to stipulate that true comparisons take an awful long time to do. Unfortunately, science is hard. And sometimes you need to let the cells, you need to study the cells for a long period of time before you'll see a possible hiccup. So in our case, we're reprogramming these skin cells back to like embryonic stem cells, and then we coax them into the type of neuron that is lost in a Parkinsonian or a Parkinson's patient. And this is as a research tool. So taking skin, making it into neurons. So conventionally, it's very difficult to get the kind of material to study Parkinson's because, if I meet a Parkinson's patient and I say, can I have some cells to do research on Parkinson's? First of all, that particular patient has been diagnosed this week, perhaps, but the molecular cues that started the whole trigger of the disease happening in the first place would have happened many, many years ago. So in a way, if I take cells from this Parkinson's patient, I'm coming to a crime scene long after the crime has actually been committed. And I, as a researcher, cannot tell whether the changes that I see between the normal cells and the cells from the disease, whether those differences are related to the onset of the disease or not. So I want a way to study the disease before, during, and after. And this is one approach that people are using at the moment by making skin cells forget, they become stem cells, make them into Parkinsonian neurons, and then see if I can see Parkinson's emerge from those skin cells. And we're looking for those kind of events at the moment. And the idea is that if we can see Parkinson's arise when we look down the microscope into a petri dish, that we can see, plaques forming and all the other kind of cellular characteristics of the disease. And then we would have an approximation of the disease in a test tube. And what that would mean then is I could start testing for drugs that would stop that disease or retard it, or I could start studying the onset of disease before, during, and after. So this is basically an approach a lot of people are currently taking, and the idea is try to make a platform where you could basically make better drugs to stop Parkinson's from happening in the first place, and or understanding the very first steps that initially start the whole progression that ends up being the disease called Parkinson's. So, okay. So I think we should maybe have a few more questions, or has anybody kind of something hasn't been said here. I think we haven't really talked too much about the legal situation in Ireland, for example. Certainly there has been calls for a further development, certainly with regards to stem cell legislation. What kind of stem cell legislation, with regard to research is available in the country at the moment? And particularly, there is no legislation for, say, for example, doing stem cell research using embryonic stem cells from excess embryos from IVF clinics. So the lack of legislation causes many different effects. And number one, nobody knows kind of where they stand. Can I do it? Can I not do it? I think it is clear that regardless of what ultimate decision we make, it's important that we evolve the legislation. Would you like to say something about that?
Yes, that's what I'd like to cover in my talk, where Irish legislation is, the situation and how involved. And
okay. It's all ridiculously organised, you see.
I don't have any.
How can I induce stem cells in myself when I'm sick?
How can you induce stem cells
or in my patients?
It's a really good question, actually.
And if I can do that, I can ignore the rest of your talk.
It's a really good question, and actually it's a very important question, because we know, now there's stem cell biologists here, but my understanding is that there are stem cells in the brain, and they don't get activated in Alzheimer's disease or multiple sclerosis. And the big question is, why not? So it's a big negative part of why, if we injected stem cells into the brain, why would they work when the brain's own stem cells aren't being activated? So if we could find a way of activating them, that might actually be even better. So it's a really good question. The answer is we don't know. Yeah, so you have to sit through the rest of the talk.
Use them.
Sorry, I'm a haematologist. I work in St James's, and we don't necessarily induce people's stem cells, but we actually harvest patients' stem cells to use for transplantation. And by doing that, and some of the research that's come from many stem cell laboratories, we are beginning to better understand actually how the stem cell behaves in vivo, and actually how better we can use it, or how better we can do transplantation. So I think, just as Dr. Hardiman has suggested, we are learning a lot by exactly what the stem cell biologists are doing in the lab, and stem cell transplantation has been used. The first transplant in Dublin was carried out in the early 1980s, but certainly in the US the first stem cell transplants were carried out from the early 1960s. So we've been doing this for over 40 years and very successfully, and curing patients with leukemia and many other hematological malignancies. But the field of stem cell research is invaluable to learning more about how we can better use these therapies. And I think hematology certainly is more advanced in the knowledge that we have about the hematopoietic stem cell. But I think by learning about stem cells and the niche in which they live, we are learning a lot more about, as you say, better drugs. But equally, we're learning more about the similarities between different stem cells. So I think that there's a very close liaison between what we know about stem cells and what we are doing with them, and what can be done in the lab to help us use them better. So in answer to the question, how can we expand our own stem cells when we're sick, there's an awful lot of data published on what happens to stem cells in the setting of inflammation and infection and situations where the body induces a lot of systems to repair itself. And I think by a lot of work between the laboratories and clinicians, we can learn a lot more. So I think this forum between the laboratory scientists, the pharmaceutical companies who do help in by helping us advance our basic science to the next stage, I think is very useful.
My question, just a quick one. My question was just about the umbilical cord stem cell harvesting. I don't know anything about it, but is it worth? Should parents do it, in your opinion?
Can I just comment really simple point? I mean, banking umbilical stem cords, in my opinion, is a waste of time, actually. Because, first of all, we don't know the circumstances or conditions under which it's best to save umbilical cord cells. By the time we know what to do with them, the technology will have moved so far on that we'll have cells that are much more able to do what we want to do. It may not necessarily be to replace, it may be to go in and do something like just create the environment to activate our own stem cells wherever they are. So in my opinion, I don't see any validity, and I certainly wouldn't qualify for the good.
The stem cell banks, the reputable ones at least. Sorry, the stem cell banks should be authorised by the Irish Medicines Board, and so the cells there should be certain standards of. Okay.
No, the only reason I'm making a comment here is because that we have had in the Irish Patient Association quite a number of expectant mothers who have come, and they have explicitly expressed it as an insurance policy. It's not like that you're having a child because there may be some bone marrow transplants or other applications. It's just simply to have it as an insurance policy that might happen in 20 or 30 years. That, and it's thing.
Okay, thanks. Good evening. Thanks to Stephen and to the Irish Patient Association for giving me the chance to speak to you tonight. As Stephen mentioned in the introduction, my background is as a doctor, but I've moved away from that over the last few years and into bioethics and medical jurisprudence. But my interest in that area started years ago when I was training in obstetrics, and I got involved in some research. And the area of research that I was involved in concerned trophoblast or first trimester cell line, and I became aware of the fact that what we were doing wasn't covered by any legislation in this country, and that kind of both intrigued me and perturbed me, as most people do attempt to be law-abiding citizens, that there was no actual law pertaining to what we were doing. So what I want to talk to you tonight is about the legal situation in Ireland a bit, and how that situation came about, and the implications of that situation for people both who are involved in the science, the potential therapies, and patients who might be at the receiving end of those potential therapies. So bioethics is the area I'm involved in at the moment, and bioethics has emerged as a response to society's needs and demand for the existence of ethical restraints upon scientific and medical innovations and practices. And it has dealt with and continues to deal with conceptually questionable and ethically difficult issues that have been raised by advances in medical technologies. And this is a lot of this has come about since the birth of the first baby, Louise Brown, by IVF. And since then there's been much discussion on a worldwide basis on the ethics of assisted reproduction, and more recently on therapies and related therapies that have come out of human and stem cell research. In general, it has been argued that if reproductive technologies have societal repercussions, then there should be societal regulation of them through the civil law. And the law in general should play an important role in the understanding and the resolution of problems in biomedical ethics. From the law, rights and responsibilities flow that can either authorise or prohibit a particular behaviour. And in its prescription of human behaviour, the law, through a set of rights and duties, the law is similar to morality. But where morality fails to resolve conflicts or is widely questioned, the law may be or should be possibly relied on to create and enforce rules that guide human behaviour. So, as being mentioned, there's been significant differences in how different societies have regulated assisted human reproduction and human embryonic and stem cell research. And the choice of policy has often been determined by the particular society, which generally is informed by its value system, which most often stems from its religious or philosophical traditions. However, there isn't any consensus on a worldwide basis or even on a European basis to the ethical questions that concern the moral value of status of the pre-implantation embryo, or to the derivation of stem cells from such embryos. And as has been said already tonight, despite the fact that IVF has been practiced in Ireland since 1987, there is currently no Irish legislative framework that regulates assisted human reproduction or research involving either adult or embryonic stem cells. Doctors that work in the area of IVF do so under guidelines that are drawn up by the Irish Medical Council, but scientists don't have these guidelines. A commentator on Irish life, Patrick Hanifin, has said in his book, which is called Conceiving Life in Law, that the question of the regulation of human reproduction is ultimately linked with the question of the relationship of the citizen to the state. And he believes that reproductive politics are at the heart of the questions about citizenship, liberty, family and nation, and have become the site in which competing worldviews battle for the definition of both nationhood and citizenship. And probably no country demonstrates this competition better than Ireland. Ireland has been quite unique in how it has responded to date to the question of regulating embryonic and stem cell research and reproductive technologies. It has failed to do so. In the absence of legislation in this area is seen as extremely unsatisfactory by both those involved in the scientific research in this area and by the patient groups who may benefit from the therapies that develop from this research. Ireland effectively has no legislation or national policy either allowing or prohibiting the use of embryos for research. Successive Irish governments have not provided confidence-inspiring track records of legislatively dealing with complex and controversial problems raised either by reproduction or reproductive technologies. Within Ireland, there seems to be an obvious unwillingness on the part of the political class to engage in open, deliberative debate and consensus politics on issues of bioethical controversy, particularly where any Catholic ethical values are at stake. And this is really the reason for the title of my thesis. I think this is what we do in Ireland when we come against ethical issues. You're all well aware of Article 40.3.3 of the Irish Constitution, or the 8th Amendment as it's also known, that the state acknowledges the right to life of the unborn and with due regard to the equal right to life of the mother, guarantees in its laws to respect and, as far as is practicable, by its laws to defend and vindicate that right. And one of the problems that became apparent with this amendment very quickly after its introduction was the concept of the unborn. It introduced this word into the Constitution while it failed to define it. This problem was recognised quite early on by the Constitutional Review Committee of 1996, which said that the definition is needed as to when unborn acquires the protection of the law. Philosophers and scientists may continue to debate when human life begins, but the law must define what it intends to protect. Determining at what stage this guarantee to defend and vindicate the right to life is important, given its implications both for ART and for the potential use of any spare embryos that are generated from IVF. As it can't be said for certainty whether the protection afforded by Article 40.3.3 to the unborn applies from the moment of fertilisation, the moment of implantation, or at some later date. The importance of this anomalous situation became apparent in the case, which you're probably all familiar with, of a separated couple who were disputing what happened to their 3 frozen embryos from an IVF cycle in 2006. This came before the High Court, and the justice in this case gave what may be considered to be quite a brave judgment. After examining the legislative history of the Constitution and of the amendment in question, concluded that the previous cases which revolved around the rights of the unborn had used inconclusive language, that the preamble to the 1937 Constitution had envisaged a Constitution that would absorb change and could be interpreted in accordance with prevailing ideas and concepts. In other words, it was more of an organic animal than people had regarded it before. What people thought in 1937 shouldn't be what people in 2006 in this case should think, because people in 1937 had never heard, for example, of pre-implantation embryos produced from IVF. And he concluded that the courts really haven't considered whether the word unborn in Article 40.3.3 actually included embryos in vitro. He found that while embryos in vitro are deserving of special respect, the frozen embryos in this case in question were not unborn as defined by the Constitution. And this is what I said. He concluded that to infer that it was in the mind of the people that unborn, including embryos outside of the womb or embryos in vitro, would be to completely ignore the circumstances in which the amendment giving rise to Article 40.3.3 arose. As in, this amendment took place in 1983, and as I said, IVF didn't start in Ireland until 1987. He also went on to say that there's been no evidence adduced to establish that this was ever in the mind of the people, and to infer it would be our interpretation of what had happened then. He went on to say that he felt that laws should reflect society's values and will be influenced them, but at the end of the day, it is the duty of the court to implement law and not morality. So, the conclusion of the judgment in this case was that in the absence of legislation or precedent, the function of the court is not to choose between competing moral or religious beliefs, but to strictly interpret the Constitution. And Justice McGovern was satisfied that there was no authority dealing directly with the word unborn and its meaning within the Constitution. This High Court judgment has been appealed to the Supreme Court and was heard in February of this year. And in the course of presenting the arguments, the senior counsel for the state argued on behalf of the state that the embryo is not an unborn within the meaning of Article 40.3.3. And because of this, and in the absence of any regulatory body to control assisted human reproduction in Ireland, as has been suggested on 2 separate occasions by the Commission for Assisted Human Reproduction and more recently in the report of the Irish Council on Bioethics, There should be no clarification of under what conditions and for what purposes embryo research would be permitted to take place in Ireland, and as such, an in vitro embryo has actually no status under Irish law. So if the Supreme Court, which is expected to give its judgment around July of this year, upholds the decision of Justice McGovern, the legal position in Ireland would enable human embryonic and stem cell research and other related therapeutic and research applications to be carried out here, because the research may not actually violate any constitutional provisions. When these was all discussed, Dr. Dolores Dooley, who is the chairperson of the Irish Bioethics Council, in response to the continuing legal uncertainty, has stated that in defining the context and conditions under which human embryonic and stem cell research might be acceptable, and subsequently securing agreement for both of them from both the conservative and the scientific communities, however, in Ireland, is likely to prove extremely difficult. She emphasised the fact that Ireland will, in the future, have to face up to this difficult challenge of defining at which point constitutional protection of the in vitro embryo begins, or, as we're all being aware, scientific process will be stymied because there will be no legal framework in which this science can advance. Dr. Dooley went on to conclude whether or not Irish society accepts the Council's conclusion that the embryo has a significant moral value rather than full moral status. It is imperative that an end be brought to the legal vacuum. A failure to do so not only undermines the moral value of the human embryo, but undermines the people working in the field, and ultimately, probably the more important people who might benefit from the work that's being done in the field. So I'd like to say in conclusion that ultimately this is a difficult issue, but the difficulty in unravelling the ethics of reproductive technology may be due to our impoverished ability to recognise and appreciate what is normal about being human. Thank you.
Raise a bunch of potential questions, and I'm sure there are some in the audience on some of those points. But before we get there, before I turn it over, I would like to point out that Ireland is not unique. Well, you may like to think you're special. The U.S. has gone through the very same issues and head putting in sand. And for example, there was a book written a couple of years ago by a professor at the Harvard Business School, Deborah Spar, called The Baby Business, which pointed out that here we have in the private sector the assisted reproductive business really operating as a business without regulation, and yet we're thinking about embryonic stem cell research very differently and trying to control and regulate it very differently, and that there are many inconsistent policies. And her point was, well, if you're thinking, if you've left sort of IVF up to the private sector and unregulated, and this came up, for example, with issues like, for example, compensation for egg donation, et cetera. Why are you thinking about embryonic stem cell research in a very different way? And shouldn't society as a whole at least be consistent on those issues?
Yeah. I'm sorry, but particularly the issue of IVF, what doctors do is, as I said, is guided by the Irish Medical Council, but what the scientists do, like what the embryologists do, in the background in IVF isn't, and the situation used to be in Ireland, you would know that when you're doing IVF, the fewer embryos that you implant, the more chance they have to take. So, but unfortunately, if you successfully fertilise 6 eggs, you refuse successfully fertilise, you shouldn't really put back more than 3. So what used to happen in Ireland was the other 3 would just be put at the neck of the womb, the cervix, so that they wouldn't be in the uterus, but you wouldn't be breaking any law.
Talk about workarounds. It wasn't university practice in Ireland, I have to say. It's in specific locations that might be done. But you made a very interesting point talking about your research earlier on trophoblast and how uneasy you were doing that. And I think the only thing that I'm an IVF practitioner that we can fall back on is if something is not illegal, then by definition it's legal.
But should it be?
Well, it shouldn't be, of course, but I mean, it's the entire political system.
Yeah.
I'm 20 years doing IVF in Ireland. They've completely run away from it. They've stayed running away from it. It's ended up in the Supreme Court. I'm not sure how the judges will vote. It would not surprise me if this was all enveloped in some type of referendum.
I went to the court to hear the case, and from the way it was going, I don't know, but just from the questions that the Supreme Court justices were asking, I got the impression that they were going to go with the defendant rather than the plaintiff, with the state rather than the mother.
Well, I would imagine they would do that, but it would not surprise me.
Well, of course it's going to end up with a referendum if that happens.
Yeah.
It has to.
Yeah.
But that shouldn't be happening. We should have legislation now that should have prevented that from getting that far.
Certainly, if you can take the problem away from the law and get it into an ethical arena where you can have a philosophical discussion about it and try and get it down to just terms of what the people agree, that's certainly progress. But once you handle this tissue, like embryos, it's an incredibly dangerous tissue to handle because the legal aspect is right beside you. And it certainly, as the proponent of this case, almost destroyed our clinic for good work that we've done. We were almost destroyed because this lady then went and sought her costs against us.
Yes. Well, I disagree that it should be taken out of the realms of law. I think it should be taken out of the realms of ethical debate. I think there should be law, but that the law should take into account. Law should be made that for a society in a way that people within the society can live with it. And unfortunately, those with the law that goes against will always feel like they're losers, and then the other people will feel like they're winners. But I think, despite what you think about either the main reproductive issues that have been in Ireland, abortion and IVF and embryo research in Ireland, we can't continue this. I mean, we export all our problems or we stick our head in the sand.
Absolutely.
We have to bring in legislation.
I think you misunderstood me. What I'm saying to you, the law needs to be sorted out.
Yes, yes.
So at least the problem of embryo
yes.
then becomes an ethical issue that can be argued on in an arena where there are not great consequences for having to deal with embryos
yes.
like we have to do.
Yes.
That is true, and there are people who believe that blood transfusions shouldn't be given. I mean, it's the definition. Like, there's inherent personal belief which should be respected, but there's also, developing a legal framework that considers people of disparate belief systems. To be honest with you, I didn't want to steer any of this into any of the political or contentious areas.
Well, it makes it interesting.
Yeah. But what I would say is that, I think it's very important that we, take bite-sized chunks of all these arguments.
No, you can't leave it.
You're away on both sides.
I think
society's in transition. Just leave it alone. Let it go its own way.
But do you not think that it's the mark of a mature, civilized society that there's legal permission to do for some people what they think immoral if they have conscientiously thought through that process, what others think is moral?
And the vast majority of people will be jumping up on the date of conception.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Sure.
Sorry about that. 2 points. To me, if there isn't a law forbidding it, then it might be, then just carry on, if you know what I mean. Secondly, because science tends to go ahead of law, because science is always journeying into the unknown a little bit, a law tends to be a bit more black and white with specific, you need to prove the case for the law to catch up with you. Science is always ahead of law. That it's going to be difficult to expect the legal system to make laws for science, because science should be ahead of black and white issues, because science is always about discovery, research, and trying to go further ahead.
Yeah, I agree. I think bringing that back into it, like for example what Hiram was talking about, that it's illegal to advertise a medically unsubstantiated protocol, and yet we've got the internet now, you know. So, like, really, this has become more acute in many areas of medical practice. So, I mean, how do you counteract that? And I believe you counteract that through open debate and putting verifiable, like, objective data or objective information in front of people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important. I think the debate about people using treatments that are unsubstantiated started hundreds of years ago, and will continue on way after we're all dead. I think it's always going to be a tension between the individual's right to autonomy and the professional body of expertise that's trying to direct that, and then that relationship with society in general. And I think that the obligation that we have as professionals is to do our very best to communicate what we genuinely believe to be the case from a scientific point of view in a way that's most cogent and most logical and most rational, taking into account that people still have a right to choose, even if they choose something that we think is really very unwise. People still have that right. And so the objective that we should have is to ensure that the best available information is communicated in the best possible way, which I suppose is what the Harvard Stem Cell Institute is doing as well.
We're all trying to do that.
Yeah. But I think that's the main objective that we should aspire to, and I think meetings like this are very important from that point of view.
My question just relates back to clinical applications. I guess I was really positive about stem cell research before I came to this meeting, and now I'm a bit less so. But a couple of the speakers made reference to a number that gets tossed around about the 70 or so stem cell research applications, which I understand are from adult stem cell research.
Yeah, I've got that here.
And I'm just wanting to know, are you putting a question mark over that and saying, you're just questioning whether that's really what's happening, or...
Okay, so
I think the point is that there is no scientific evidence for even one of those, that these are assertions that are made on the internet by some of these, they're unsubstantiated claims for which there's no scientific basis. I think that's really the point.
Is there not been research in scientific journals? Like we often see in the media, like there's references to scientific journals and things like that.
We just get to this. Okay, so I think in essence there is scientific evidence for some things. It's normally, when it comes to this 73 figure, rudimentary experiments that are done in animals. And as we talked about earlier, you know, the transition between curing a diabetic mouse and curing a diabetic patient, there's a big void or big space between those two things. And you know, here again, I mean, the whole thing about this particular poster is it's very clever in that, number one, you have treatments, and treatments is a word, as we discussed earlier, that, you know, infers, you know, that it's in the minds of people that don't use the word like a scientific word, it infers something positive. You're thinking of treatment, well, it sounds positive. You automatically assume that it's a low risk and effective thing to do to a patient, right? So it's kind of playing on the misinterpretation of language, and you know, it doesn't specify that you're treating humans, or you know, that the science itself has been rigorously put through the mills and has been published widely. So see, I don't know, it's kind of like, you know, with the new information age, there's the decline of science journalism, where the really good journalist goes away, fact checks everything, and then comes back and writes things on the basis of what he's completely fact checked. And this kind of the blog thing then is like, I can just get up and just start writing any old stuff without any fact checking whatsoever. This figure is still even as unfortunately as recently as yesterday. Thank you for speaking English. Recently as yesterday, and like this 73 figure ultimately is exported with the idea of winning a particular argument, right? But there's no evidence that this is true. There's no scientific evidence that this is true. And I mean, it's difficult to understand how people can, purport to be an expert in something and totally ignore the tenets to which, or the rules to which their area is supposed to be. And I mean, when you see this list, it really it doesn't sink in very much, because you can't think of the damage this is doing to people. This is giving people like classic examples. They're reading this list. They think that there's a valid treatment for stem cells, and like people, clinicians and researchers, and myself, like we're all very scared that one day all these people will turn around and say, "You lied to us." Like you lied to us. This was up. I walk past billboards with this kind of information up, and you overhyped stem cells. And we try, but we're pretty boring people. So, Sorry.
Can I just make one comment? You should be enthusiastic about stem cells. They're incredibly exciting. It's an incredibly exciting scientific discipline, but that's what it is, and we need to remember that. The problem is making the jump too quickly. But it's an incredibly exciting area, and it's going to be there are going to be quantum leaps, as always happens in science. But this is don't throw the baby out of the bathwater.
Yeah.
Just be realistic.
Yeah, I mean that is true, and I mean like in terms of clinical trials take years. We could find a drug, we could find a small molecule that's already passed FDA approval for a new application that we haven't seen using stem cells much sooner. Isn't that right? So.
Sorry.
Probably one final question, and then we'll wrap up.
I'd just like to thank all the panel, the speakers, and the Irish Patients Association first for a very informative evening. I just want to make a point really about just what we've been talking about. I work in a centre for disabled children, and many parents come to us asking us about, we've seen this website and we're thinking of going to China, and it's been very informative this evening, but I'm just wondering, would it be possible for the Irish Patients Association or to put some of these websites and information together, because obviously we're battling against the media and the internet, and when parents go on, it's just there's a minefield of stuff out there. But hope is good, and I think there's a lot of hope, obviously with stem cell research, but also false hope can be equally damaging, and it'll be great to see some just factually based stuff that's accessible to people out there, myself included, would be great. Yeah.
So
thanks.
The Irish Patients Association are just putting up a new website, and this will have links to all the kind of good sites that we refer to tonight.
And I think we have one final question in the back before we wrap up here.
Just reading and just listening to the that you were talking, I have spinal cord damage here. So basically, what you were saying, like there is nothing proven that's going to fix my spinal cord of what we're reading on the internet, like of blah blah, going to China, bone marrow, stem cells, all that kind of thing. That basically there's nothing being proven yet about that. Is that what you're basically saying? And if there is embryo stem cell the only cell that's going to have a chance for my spinal cord to be fixed?
Well, I think the truth of the matter is that we're still looking, and we've seen some animal studies. And again, anybody who tells you that they can extrapolate when a therapy will come online from mouse, from human, is they're not talking sense. Ultimately, what we would say is that the more research that is done and the more clinical trials that proceed, the quicker something will come up. And ultimately, that's what we're saying, that if we have more engagement, more research, more clinical trials, then things will come quicker.
Well, from your experience, does any has come across like the bone marrow stem cells into the spinal cord or anything like that? Is there clinics that are offering anything like that?
Let me suggest we take that offline and follow up follow up afterwards, because I know we've kept some of you past the time that we promised to. And Stephen would like to say a few words to wrap up.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be very brief. I just want to say, on behalf of the Irish Patients Association, our sincere thanks to, first of all the speakers that attended here and shared their pearls of wisdom with us, and especially to you, the audience. I'd like to also thank Alice and Simon from our office, where they actually had contacted personally over 140 patient groups, and with follow-up calls and letters and all the rest of it, to ensure that there was a significant number of patients and patient groups that would actually have an opportunity to hear this. I believe that this has been a very exciting, powerful conversation. It may be probably the first one that's happened with such a mixture of different skills. We heard from this gentleman here about the IVF issues, and I think many others on the regulatory side, on the access to phase 3 trials. And I think we have started now a conversation that I think that the patient's voice will be at the centre, certainly with our assistance and your support, to ensure that you yourselves and your own patient groups can have your voices heard. As I say, I think to the healthcare system in the wider sense, both in Ireland and in Europe and even beyond that, I think the call to action is really nothing about us without us. And again, I'd like to thank everybody, to Brock for having travelled so far to come to us this evening, and to Stephen for his energy and so on, and the rest of our speakers. And again, my sincere thanks to you all. It's been probably one of the most exciting discussions and challenging discussion intellectually that I've certainly participated in for a long, long time. And thank you.